The BFG, knowing what a coward the flesh lump eater was, saw his chance. "You was bitten by a snake," he shouted. "I seed it biting you. It was a frightsome poisonous viper. It was a dreadly dungerous wind-screened viper." "Save our souls!" bellowed the flesh lump eater. "Sound the crumpets! I is bitten by a septious, venomous, wind-screened viper." And he flopped to the ground and sat there howling, his head off, clutching his ankle with both hands. His fingers felt the brooch. "The teeth of the dreadly viper is still sticking into me," he yelled. "I is feeling the teeth sticking into my anklet." The BFG saw his second chance. "We must be getting those viper's teeth out at once," he cried. "Otherwise you is deader than duck soup. I is helping you." The BFG knelt down beside the flesh lump eater. "You must grab your anklet very tight with both hands," he ordered. "That will stop the poisonous juices from the venomous viper going up your leg into your heart." The flesh lump eater grabbed his ankle with both hands. "Now close your eyes and griddle your teeth and look up to heaven and say your prayers while I has taken the teeth of the venomous viper," the BFG said. The terrified flesh lump eater did exactly what he was told, and the BFG signaled for some rope. A soldier rushed it over to him. With both the flesh lump eater's hands gripping his ankle, it was a simple matter for the BFG to tie the ankles and hands together with tight knots. "I is pulling out the frightsome viper's teeth," the BFG said as he pulled the knot tight. "Do it quickly," shouted the flesh lump eater, "before I is pizened to death." "There we is," the BFG said, standing up. "You can look now." When the flesh lump eater saw that he was trussed up like a turkey, he gave a yell so loud that the heavens trembled. He rolled and wriggled, and he fought, and he figgled, and he squirmed, and he squiggled, but there was not a thing he could do. "Well done, you," Sophie said. "Well done, you," said the BFG, smiling down at the little girl. "You is saving all of our lives." "Will you please get that brooch back for me?" Sophie said. "It belongs to the queen." The BFG pulled the beautiful brooch out of the flesh lump eater's ankle. The flesh lump eater howled, and the BFG wiped the pin and handed it back to Sophie. Curiously, not one of the other 8 snoring giants had woken up during this schmozzle. When you is only sleeping 1 or 2 hours a day, you is sleeping extra doubly deep, the BFG explained. The heads of the Army and the Air Force drove forward once again in their jeep. "Her Majesty will be very pleased with me," the head of the Army said. "I shall probably get a medal. What's the next move?" "Now you is all driving over to my cave to load up my bottles of dreams," the BFG said. "We can't waste time with such rubbish," the Army General said. "It is the Queen's order," Sophie said. She was now back on the BFG's hand. So the 9 jeeps drove across the BFG's cave. The great dream loading operation began, and there were 50,000 jars in all to be loaded up, more than 5,000 to each jeep, and it took over an hour to finish the job. While the soldiers were loading the dreams, the BFG and Sophie disappeared over the mountains on a mysterious errand. When they came back, the BFG had a sack the size of a small house slung over his shoulder. "What have you got in there?" the head of the army demanded to know. "Curiosity is killing the rat," the BFG said, and he turned away from the silly man. When he was sure that all his precious dreams had been safely loaded onto the jeeps, the BFG said, "Now we is driving back to the belly poppers and picking up the frightsome giants." The jeeps drove back to the helicopters. The 50,000 dreams were carried carefully, jar by jar, onto the helicopters, and the soldiers climbed back on board. But the BFG and Sophie stayed on the ground. Then they all returned to where the 9 giants were lying. It was a fine sight to see these great air machines hovering over the trussed-up giants. It was an even finer sight to see the giants being woken up by the terrific thunderings of the engines overhead, and the finest sight of all was to observe those 9 hideous brutes squirming and twisting about on the ground like a mass of mighty snakes as they tried to free themselves from their ropes and chains. "I is flush-blunkled," roared Flesh Lump Eater. "I is splits-wiggled," yelled the Child Chewer. "I is swog-swalloped," bellowed the Bone Cruncher. "I is goose-grundled," howled Man Hugger. I is gunzel swiped, shouted the meat dripper. I is flunk gungled, screamed the maid masher. I is slop groggled, squawked the gizzard gulper. I is crowd squinkled, yelled the blood bottler. I is bop mubberg, screeched butcher boy. And here they are, being brought back to England. The 9 giant carrying helicopters, each chose a separate giant and hovered directly over them. Very strong steel hawsers and hooks at the ends of them were lowered from the front and rear of each helicopter. The BFG quickly secured the hooks to the giant's chains, one hook near the legs and one near the arms, and then very slowly the giants were winched into the air, parallel with the ground. The giants roared and bellowed, but there was nothing they could do. The BFG and Sophie, once more resting comfortably in his ear, set off at a gallop for England, and the helicopters all banked around and followed after him. It was an amazing spectacle, those 9 helicopters winging through the sky, each with a trussed-up 50-foot-long giant slung underneath it. The giants themselves must have found it an interesting experience. They never stopped bellowing, but their howls were drowned by the noise of the engines. When it began to get dark, the helicopters switched on powerful searchlights and trained them on to the galloping giant so as to keep him in sight. They flew right through the night and arrived in England just as dawn was breaking.